In today's video, I'm going to show you how to do the slip stitch zigzag join. Now, before we get started, please remember to like and subscribe. Now, this join is being used on my Patchwork Prism baby blanket. You can use this join for any blanket that has squares, because it's just so pretty and it's so easy to do. Now, this join is really interesting because you work with it in where you lay out your blanket and you just join all of your rows at one time, and then it's kind of flumpy, but then you go back and you join all the columns, and that's what secures it all together. Now, this join is reversible. Now, I chose to use this side as my right side so that you can see this lovely texture here, and I like this texture because for me it works with the texture that the rest of the blanket has. But if you look on the other side, you have a lovely flat join, so it just looks like a nice zigzag. So it's really easy to do. All it is slip stitches, and it's a ton of fun. So let's go ahead and get started. This is a blanket that uses 16 squares, and I just love how this join comes out with it. Now, some people prefer to block all their squares before they do their join. Since I'm going to be blocking the baby blanket afterwards, I really am not worried about it. Plus, there's only 27 stitches and then the chain 2 space that we'll be joining. So for me, it's pretty easy to keep track of. If you are doing larger squares, you'll probably want to block ahead of time. Now, before we get started on the join, I'm going to show you a picture of how I laid out my squares, because I like to take a picture first to make sure that I like the layout of where the placement of the squares is. Now, you'll notice that there are rows, and there's rows 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then there's columns A, B, C, and D. Now, we're going to begin by joining the rows to each other. So we're going to join row 1 and 2, then 2 and 3, then 3 and 4. And then it's going to feel a little loosey-goosey because you're only joining that one side. Then we're going to go in and join the columns so that that firms it all up. Now, to begin with this, you will need your crochet hook and your yarn and your square. And there's a couple of notes to keep in mind as you're doing it. So you will always be working with the right side facing, and our hook is always going to go from the front to back or top down. That's just a real easy way to remember it. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the first 2 rows, which I have joined. So this is row 1, this is row 2, and you can see that it's joined, but it's still a little loose on this edge, or at this join. And that's because we haven't joined the columns together yet. To begin with the join, my first step is to insert stitch markers. And I have a chain 2 space here in the corners. Those are easy to find, but what I do is I put my stitch marker into the very first stitch, so that way I can see that easier when I'm going in to do the actual join. So I'm not going to join, or I'm not going to mark this chain 2 space, even though we will be using them. Instead, I'm going to mark the stitch right beside it. And then I'm going to come down here to where I believe the last stitch is, and I'm going to insert a stitch marker in it. Then I'm going to go through and count, because I should have a total of 27 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5, 26. That tells me I need to move one of my markers. Okay, 27 stitches on that one. And then on this square that's going to be getting joined to it, this is the one square that corresponds with row 3. I'm going to do the same thing, making sure that there are 27 stitches. So I'm not going to put my marker in this chain 2 space. Instead, I'm going to put it into this stitch. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, now that we have 27 stitches that are marked here, I'm going to set those aside, and then we're going to work by having these right side facing. Now, it's a little bit fiddly when you first get started with it, and that's okay because we'll be working with it to make it a little bit easier. I'm just trying to find my yarn here. Now, the first step is we're going to make our slip knot. So just make that slip knot, and then I'm going to tighten this up a bit. Now I'm going to remove my hook. because I'm going to put my hook in this beginning chain 2 space. So remember, not where your stitch marker is, but that chain 2 space. And for some patterns, you might have a chain 1. That's totally fine. So we're going to bring in, well, put that slip knot back on our hook. I'm going to tighten this up a little bit and bring it through. Then, this is the part where it starts to feel a little bit fiddly. You'll insert your hook into the chain 2 space on that left side square. So from front to back, just like so, you'll grab that yarn, pull it through, and then do a slip stitch. Now, you've already worked that chain 2 space on your right side square. You've worked your chain 2 space on your left side square. So now you're going to move up to where that first stitch is that is marked. Now, because of where I did my placement, things got moved around, so I'm just going to undo it and then redo that slip stitch. Now, this next stitch, we're just going to go into the one that is marked. And then we're going to work a slip stitch. Then you can remove that marker. Then we're going to go into the next one that's marked on the left side. And you can remove the marker as you do the stitch, before you do it, after, whatever works for you. I'm going to go ahead and remove it right now because I feel like I have a whole lot going on here. And then we're going to work that slip stitch. Then we'll come over to our right hand square, work a slip stitch in the next stitch. And then we'll move over to the next square, or the left square, the next stitch, working front to back, we'll work a slip stitch. And one important thing is you want to keep your tension pretty consistent with these. You don't want to be too tight, but you don't want to be too loose either. So now we're going to go up into this next stitch on the right side square, work a slip stitch, and then on the left side we go into the next one. And that's really all there is to it. So then we're back to the right hand side, or the right side square, front to back, slip stitch, and then to the left side square, next stitch up. And see, it's pretty simple to do. And you just continue working in that fashion, alternating the stitch, or alternating your sides, I should say. So I'm going to continue going up this side, and then I will meet you when we get up to the corner area where we will be joining our next square. So this is what we have so far. I'll meet you when we get up to here, so that way we can join the next one. I'm coming up to the corner. Just a couple more to go. Now I'm going to do this last stitch right here, and that's where it's marked as a stitch. We still have that chain 2 space. And I'll remove the marker. And I'm going to do the same over here. Then I'll remove that marker. I'm going to go into the chain 2 space, just like we have with the others, and then the other chain 2 space. Now I'm going to remove my hook and just set this down for a moment and show you this join. Look how pretty that is. Now we're going to grab our next square. And what we're going to do is do the markers on the first stitch and the last stitch so that we have a total of 27 stitches. And we will do the same on the next square, which in my case is this one right here. So we'll do those, and then what we're going to do is just move right back in with that chain 2 space, doing the same process that we did with this. So I'm going to go ahead and mark these 2 squares, and then I'll come back to get you started on that corner. I have these 2 squares marked. This is the one that is attached to the blanket. This is the one that's loose and on its own. So we're going to begin by doing a slip stitch in the chain 2 space of this loose square. Then we're going to move and do the chain 2 space of the one that's attached to the blanket. So we begin that by inserting from front to back into that chain 2 space. We'll do that slip stitch. Then we're going to move over to the next chain 2 space, working from front to back. And do its slip stitch. And then we'll go into where that first stitch is on that right hand square. Now I have mine marked and it got lost in that last slip stitch. So I'm going to actually undo that for a moment so that I can move my marker so that I can see it better. All right, here we go. All right, so now we're going to move to this first one that's marked on the right side square. And that's when we're going to start with our stitches. So I'm going to remove that marker, do that slip stitch. Then we'll come to the next one on the left side marker, or the left side square that has the marker, work a slip stitch. And then we just go back into that same pattern that we were doing, where we alternate sides, working up the next stitch with a slip stitch. So I'm going to just do a couple more. That's 1, and 2, and just work your way up. And you just continue that method for each of your rows. And then I will meet you back for us to begin joining the columns. I've joined the other columns so this way you can see how they look, because it is the same way as we were doing the rows, except for one little difference here up in the corner. So I figure I will just show you how to work that, because it just works a teeny tiny bit differently, and it's not really even differently, it's just showing you where to put your stitches. So you end up doing the columns just the same way as you did the rows, working all the way up. And I'm up to where I just have a couple of stitches left. So let's work those really quick. So I'm going to work this slip stitch. Oops, let's get here. All right, 1 slip stitch. And then we're going to do one in that last stitch. And I'm going to remove that stitch marker. And then work one in this last stitch here. And remove that stitch marker. Now it's very important that you don't forget about the chain 2 spaces. So work that chain 2 space. When you do it, make sure that you're coming up underneath where that row join is. So that's 1, and then this other chain 2 space. And see, we're just getting in before that row join. And now we're going to move up and we're going to work over this. And we're going to begin by working in that chain 2 space that's in that next block and the next block. Now what I do with these, so I'm going to go in there, but this is where I go just a tiny bit tighter with your slip stitch. Just See, it's not a whole lot tighter, but just a little bit. And then one in the next. And then you just start working your zigzag slip stitch all the way up. Here, I'll show you what we did. Take these markers out real quick. Sometimes they don't like to let go. All right. So here you can see where it went over, and it gives it a nice straight join. And that's it for the join. Now, if you are working on the Patchwork Prism baby blanket, there's a link down below where you can find the video for the border that's going to be made for the blanket. But I do hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you did, please give me a thumbs up, like, and subscribe, and I will see you later for more patterns and tutorials. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.